The South China Sea is at the heart of one of the most intense geopolitical tensions of our time. A strategic zone rich in natural resources, it draws the attention of many regional and global powers. The question that arises is whether these tensions can be contained diplomatically, or if the world is on the brink of a new major conflict. To understand these tensions, this video will take you through the region's history, the key players, and why the South China Sea is on the verge of implosion. The South China Sea is a marginal sea of the Pacific Ocean, covering approximately 3.5 million square kilometers. It is bordered by several countries: China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Vietnam. It is characterized by the presence of numerous archipelagos and plays a crucial role as a maritime corridor connecting East Asia to Europe and the Middle East. Beyond its strategic importance, the South China Sea is rich in natural resources such as hydrocarbons. Now that you know where the South China Sea is located, let's take a closer look at the region's history. The South China Sea has always been an important crossroads for trade and cultural interactions. Since ancient times, maritime trade routes have crossed this sea, linking China to other regions of Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East. Chinese, Arab, and Malay sailors and traders navigated these waters, exchanging goods such as silk, spices, and ceramics. The ancient kingdoms and empires of the region all benefited from this strategic position. As you can imagine, there were no clearly defined maritime borders at the time, making navigation and trade relatively free. However, the arrival of European colonial powers in the 16th century disrupted the regional dynamics. The Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, British, and French successively established colonies and trading posts in the region. Colonial ambitions often led to territorial and maritime conflicts. In the 19th century, France took control of Indochina, which includes present-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, while Britain consolidated its power over Malaysia, Singapore, and northern Borneo. Spain dominated the Philippines until the end of the 19th century, followed by the United States after the Spanish-American War. These colonial powers redefined territorial and maritime borders, imposing their own geopolitical vision. Later, decolonization after World War II left a power vacuum in Southeast Asia, and the newly independent nation-states inherited the borders imposed by the colonizers, sometimes leading to territorial disputes. But what are these tensions? Why is the region so highly contested? One of the main reasons for the tensions in the South China Sea is the abundance of natural resources. The region is known for its significant reserves of oil and natural gas. It is estimated to contain up to 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. These resources represent a major economic opportunity for the coastal countries. In addition to hydrocarbons, the South China Sea is also rich in fisheries resources. These resources include all aquatic organisms exploitable by humans, such as fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and even algae. These resources are crucial for global food supply and the economy. However, they face challenges such as overfishing, pollution, and climate change. The fishing zones of the South China Sea are among the most productive in the world. For local populations, fishing is an essential source of livelihood, adding an economic and social dimension to territorial claims. But that's not all. The South China Sea is also of critical strategic importance. It is traversed by some of the busiest maritime routes in the world. About one-third of global maritime trade passes through this region, representing billions of dollars in goods each year. Controlling these routes offers a considerable strategic and economic advantage. Moreover, the presence of numerous islands and reefs, such as the Spratly and Paracel Islands, allows for the establishment of military bases and surveillance facilities. China, in particular, has invested heavily in the construction and militarization of artificial islands, thereby strengthening its military presence in the region. But we'll discuss that later. Before that, it's important to know that there are international laws governing the sea, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. It came into force in 1994 and is the main legal framework regulating maritime claims. It establishes rules concerning territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and continental shelves. However, interpretations of UNCLOS vary from country to country, contributing to disputes. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague issued a ruling on a dispute between the Philippines and China over the South China Sea. The tribunal concluded that China's claims based on the 9-Line had no legal basis under UNCLOS. China rejected this decision, further escalating tensions. But what is the 9-line? What are the different tensions? We'll explain everything. The main actor in the region is China, which claims approximately 90% of the South China Sea. In 1975, the country took advantage of the Vietnam War to establish a military presence on two archipelagos, the Paracels and the Spratlys, which contain numerous islands and represent a vast economic zone. This marked the beginning of China's expansion policy in the region. It's worth noting that as early as 1947, China claimed the majority of the South China Sea in one move by establishing the 9-line on maps. The 9-line is an undefined demarcation that China uses to assert territorial sovereignty over a large portion of the South China Sea. However, several countries in the region, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, contest this claim, as they also lay claim to islands and maritime zones in this part of the world. However, as you saw earlier, international law does not recognize the 9-line. Despite this, China continues to maintain its claims by supporting its sovereignty with evidence dating back to the Han Dynasty around 210 BCE. According to China, historical documents and maps show that the Chinese discovered, named, and administered these islands since that time. It is also important to note that since the 1980s, China has intensified its efforts to assert sovereignty over the region. This includes building artificial islands, militarizing certain islands, and conducting frequent naval patrols. China's policy in the South China Sea is part of a broader strategy to project maritime power. The country seeks to secure its trade routes, access crucial natural resources, and strengthen its geopolitical position against the United States and other regional powers. In the region, Vietnam also has a long history of conflicts with China. The two countries have clashed multiple times, notably during the Battle of the Paracel Islands in 1974 and the Battle of the Spratly Islands in 1988. Vietnam continues to claim its islands and has also strengthened its military presence in the region. For the country, the stakes in the South China Sea are both economic and strategic. Fishing and oil exploration are vital sectors for its economy, while securing its territorial waters is a national security priority. The Philippines is another key player in the South China Sea tensions. The country quickly strengthened its alliance with the United States and established an annual joint military exercise called Balikatan, with the first operation taking place in 1981. The Philippines has faced pressure from China, particularly during the Scarborough Shoal standoff in 2012. This confrontation led the Philippines to file a complaint against China with the Permanent Court of Arbitration, resulting in the 2016 ruling mentioned earlier. After this decision, the Philippines temporarily adopted a more conciliatory approach toward China, seeking to strengthen economic ties while maintaining its territorial claims. Malaysia, on the other hand, claims parts of the Spratly Islands based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS. The country has taken a pragmatic approach, seeking to avoid direct confrontations while pursuing its economic and strategic interests. Malaysia has also strengthened its naval capabilities and cooperates with other ASEAN countries to promote regional maritime security. Finally, there is Brunei. It is the smallest of the coastal states bordering the South China Sea in terms of population and land area. The Sultanate claims an exclusive economic zone that includes part of the Spratly Islands. But what exactly is an exclusive economic zone? It is a maritime area where a coastal state exercises sovereign rights and economic control over the exploitation and use of natural resources. This zone extends up to approximately 370 kilometers, 200 nautical miles, from the state's coast. Within this area, the state has the right to explore and exploit natural resources, whether biological, such as fish, or non-biological, such as oil and gas. Also known as an EEZ, it allows the state to conduct economic activities such as generating energy from water, currents, and wind. It is important to note that the concept of EEZ was established by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, signed in 1982 in Montego Bay. But back to Brunei. The country has taken a discreet and diplomatic approach in its claims, avoiding direct confrontations. Brunei's primary interest in the South China Sea lies in its natural resources, particularly oil and gas, which are crucial for its economy. However, it is not just the countries in the region that play a crucial role in the geopolitics of the South China Sea. The United States plays a key role. As the dominant naval power, it has a strategic interest in maintaining freedom of navigation in this vital region. The The US has conducted several operations to challenge China's claims, which it considers excessive. The US also supports its regional allies, including the Philippines and Vietnam, by strengthening military cooperation and providing defense assistance. As a result, the American presence in the South China Sea is seen as a counterbalance to China's growing influence. ASEAN must also be mentioned. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, plays a central role in managing tensions in the South China Sea. It is a political, economic, and cultural organization created in 1967. The member countries include Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. They aim to promote a multilateral and peaceful approach to resolving territorial disputes. However, internal differences among ASEAN members make it difficult to form a unified position. ASEAN countries have negotiated with China to establish a code of conduct in the South China Sea, aiming to prevent conflicts and promote cooperation. These discussions led to the signing of a declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea with China in 2002, an agreement that is non-binding and meant to prevent conflicts. However, this has not been enough to stop ongoing tensions. Other important Asian actors also play a role. For instance, Japan and India are also concerned about tensions in the South China Sea due to their economic and strategic interests. Japan, in particular, has territorial disputes with China in the East China Sea and supports ASEAN's efforts to maintain regional stability. The same applies to Taiwan, which is located in the East China Sea, bordering the South China Sea. Taiwan claims several islands in the region, including Taiping Island, the largest landmass in the area. India, for its part, has strengthened its cooperation with ASEAN countries and the United States to counter China's growing influence. India participates in naval exercises focused on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. During the 1980s and 1990s, incidents around the Spratly Islands, claimed by China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei increased. Most countries in the region established military outposts on various reefs and islets. ASEAN then sought to encourage dialogue by signing, along with China, the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, mentioned earlier. Then, in the 2010s, China was criticized for its land reclamation activities, which aimed to transform reefs into artificial islands equipped with military infrastructure by draining coastal marshlands. On these islands, China deployed airports, troops, and missile launch zones to strengthen its claims over the entire area. In 2012, China took control of Scarborough Shoal, which is also claimed by the Philippines. This has raised concerns among neighboring countries and the United States, which have strengthened their military presence in the region. Then, as previously mentioned, in 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration of ASEAN issued a historic ruling rejecting China's claims. However, China refused to recognize this ruling and continued its policy of assertion. Later, Beijing and Manila became embroiled in a serious diplomatic crisis over the Second Thomas Shoal, which is under Philippine control. Incidents have multiplied, involving military ships, coast guards, and fishing boats. Thus, from an initially localized conflict over several islands and reefs, the situation has evolved into a major geostrategic issue. On March 5, 2024, Manila accused Chinese forces of deliberately causing collisions with two of their boats and injuring 4 people with water cannons during a new resupply mission. Since then, incidents have continued to escalate. Let's explain. In January 2024, facing rising tensions, Vietnam and the Philippines strengthened their ties. At that time, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. made a state visit to Hanoi. This marked a significant rapprochement between the two Asian powers, particularly in maritime security in the South China Sea. This growing alliance was previously illustrated by a new cooperation agreement, the announcement of a future bilateral code of conduct in the South China Sea, and Vietnam's invitation to participate in the multilateral naval exercise Marpalex, scheduled for 2024 off the coast of the Philippines, alongside Indonesia and Japan. This naval exercise takes place every 2 years and aims to enhance cooperation and capabilities in marine pollution control, including fire response, rescue operations, and oil spill recovery. The primary goal is to strengthen planning, command, and control through integrated maritime maneuvers. However, it is important to note that the Philippines and Vietnam have not always been aligned on the South China Sea issue, as their own maritime and territorial disputes have hindered maritime cooperation for many years. It should also be remembered that between 1964 and 1969, the Philippine president supported the United States in the Vietnam War and deployed tens of thousands of soldiers to the country, alongside other allies, primarily for medical aid and assistance projects. Despite this, the Philippines and Vietnam gradually saw their interests converge, particularly regarding China, which both countries view with caution. Eventually, they found ways to normalize their bilateral relations, especially after the withdrawal of Vietnamese forces from Cambodia in 1989, the end of the border conflict with China, and Vietnam's accession to ASEAN in 1995. The real turning point came in the 2010s when both countries intensified exchanges on common interests. This led to the implementation of the Philippines-Vietnam Action Plan from 2011 to 2016, which included a memorandum of understanding to establish a direct hotline between the Philippine Coast Guard and the Vietnamese Maritime Police, as well as another memorandum to strengthen mutual cooperation and information sharing between their navies. Shortly after, the two countries adopted a standard operational procedure for joint patrols and signed several important technical agreements alongside the entire ASEAN. In March 2024, China accused the United States of using the Philippines as a pawn following several incidents around disputed islets. Just before this, the Philippine Coast Guard accused their Chinese counterparts of, among other things, causing collisions with two of their boats. The clash occurred near the disputed Second Thomas Shoal. Meanwhile, Beijing accused Philippine forces of deliberately ramming a Chinese vessel to provoke an incident after allegedly intruding into the area. Following this, Mao Ning, a spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stated during a press conference, "China advises the United States not to use the Philippines as a pawn to create trouble in the South China Sea." She added, "The Philippines should not allow itself to be manipulated by the United States." Subsequently, ASEAN and Australian leaders warned against any unilateral action that could threaten peace, security, and stability in the region. It should be noted that the Philippines has signed military agreements with both the United States and Australia. Then, in May 2024, China made headlines for considering the construction of underwater tunnels in the region. The goal is to house soldiers and weapons while providing protection against natural disasters and enemy strikes. Additionally, this would allow China to strengthen its presence and extend its influence in the region. However, this project could potentially shift the balance of power in the area, giving China a significant advantage over its rivals. As a result, this initiative raises numerous legal and diplomatic questions. The construction of such military infrastructure in contested waters would be seen as a major provocation by neighboring countries and the United States. Furthermore, the environmental impact of such developments would be considerable in an area home to fragile marine ecosystems already threatened by the construction of artificial islands. This new project could cause irreversible damage to marine biodiversity. In July 2024, Manila and Beijing reached a temporary agreement on a disputed reef. The goal is to ensure the resupply of Philippine troops stationed on a contested reef in the South China Sea. This concerns an isolated outpost on the Second Thomas Shoal, which has been the center of confrontations between Chinese and Philippine vessels, as previously mentioned. It is important to note that a small group of Philippine soldiers is stationed on a rusted warship called BRP Sierra Madre, which was deliberately grounded on the Second Thomas Shoal in 1999 to support Manila's territorial claims in the region. As a result, the Philippines and China have agreed on a temporary arrangement for the delivery of essential supplies and personnel rotations to the Second Thomas Shoal. It was initially thought that tensions might ease, but barely a month later, two collisions reignited tensions between the two countries. According to Philippine media, two resupply vessels from the Coast Guard were navigating when they were subjected to illegal maneuvers by their Chinese counterparts. One of the ships was reportedly struck on its side, creating a hole on the deck, while the second hit two rocks, leaving a hole measuring 76 centimeters in length and 91 centimeters in width. On the Chinese side, the Coast Guard accused their Philippine counterparts of unprofessional and dangerous behavior following what they called a deliberate collision. This incident took place near Sabina Shoal, which is known as Escoda in the Philippines and Xianbin in China. This area has become the latest flashpoint between the two countries' surveillance ships. The collision occurred less than 2 weeks after an aerial incident between Chinese and Philippine military forces over another atoll, Scarborough Shoal, which Beijing seized in 2012. However, according to some media outlets, The real issue stems from the United States, which seeks to maintain its hegemony and maritime dominance in the Eastern Pacific and strongly opposes China's expansion of its maritime power. It should be noted that shortly before the collision, the U.S. Navy conducted joint maneuvers with French vessels in the Philippine Sea, claiming to support a free and open Indo-Pacific. For some, these tensions resemble the Cold War era, with current divisions pitting China against the United States. Following the latest collisions between Philippine and Chinese vessels, the United States offered to escort Philippine ships on their resupply missions to outposts in the South China Sea. However, Manila stated that it would not accept this offer unless it became incapable of ensuring vital resupply operations, and if its troops were in imminent danger. General Browner, a member of the Philippine military, stated, "We are grateful that the United States has offered us a range of options, including joining us or escorting us on resupply missions." Meanwhile, the U.S. military stated that escorting a vessel is a completely reasonable option within the framework of our Mutual Defense Treaty. In August 2024 alone, there were 5 incidents in the South China Sea. Tensions continued in September 2024, with Beijing asserting that it would crush any foreign incursion violating its sovereignty, particularly in the South China Sea. Chinese Army Lieutenant General He Lei explained, "We hope that the South China Sea remains a sea of peace, but if the United States moves its pawns behind the scenes, pushes countries to the front lines, or if the United States itself ends up on the front lines, the Chinese military will not hesitate." He added, "The People's Liberation Army of China will resolutely crush any hostile foreign incursion violating China's sovereign, territorial, and maritime rights and interests." In response, the U.S. military warned against Beijing's use of dangerous, coercive, and potentially escalatory tactics. Later, at the end of September, China conducted a test launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, equipped with a dummy warhead in the Pacific. While no direct connection was made to ongoing tensions, this launch highlighted the broader Sino-American rivalry in the Pacific, as well as the escalating disputes between Beijing and Manila in the South China Sea and tensions between China and Taiwan. No details were reported regarding the missile's impact location. The Chinese Ministry of Defense also did not specify whether the missile was launched from a submarine or land. It is important to note that ICBMs are among the most powerful weapons in the world, capable of carrying devastating nuclear warheads. The Chinese Ministry of Defense stated, on September 25 at 8:44 a.m., the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force successfully launched an intercontinental ballistic missile carrying a dummy warhead into the high seas of the Pacific Ocean. It landed precisely in the predetermined maritime area. The ministry added, "This missile launch is part of the annual routine training program of the Rocket Force. It complies with international rights and practices and does not target any specific country or objective." The future of the South China Sea remains complex and uncertain due to its multiple geopolitical and economic stakes. Territorial disputes between China and other countries in the region, such as the Philippines, as well as external powers like the United States, continue to escalate. China's militarization of certain island reefs and the responses from other nations could further intensify the conflict. Despite these tensions, diplomatic efforts are being made to resolve disputes peacefully. It is also important to recognize that the South China Sea faces major environmental challenges, including overfishing, pollution, and climate change. These factors could impact the region's ability to sustain a growing population and maintain its natural resources. Unfortunately, the rivalry between the United States and China is likely to persist as both nations seek to expand their influence in the region. Now, you know everything about the tensions in the South China Sea. As tensions continue to escalate, the risk of military confrontation remains a major concern for the international community. Despite diplomatic efforts, military maneuvers and provocations remain frequent, fueling the perception that the region is on the brink of a major conflict. In this ongoing struggle between diplomacy and confrontation, the world watches with concern, aware that a crisis in this region could have consequences far beyond its borders.